picture this. Dinner's barely started, and half of it is already on the floor. Rice scattered across the high chair tray. A piece of chicken flung with real enthusiasm. And somewhere in the middle of cleaning it up, your toddler starts crying because now you've taken the plate away, and apparently that was also unacceptable. So you're dealing with two problems at once: food being wasted and a meltdown happening anyway. And it feels like there's no way to fix one without making the other worse. Slow down to reduce the waste, and you risk a bigger tantrum. Let them fling and finish quickly, and the waste just keeps happening every single night. There's a Japanese concept that quietly addresses both of these at the same time, not by adding a rule, but by changing the entire relationship a child has with food, from the very first bite. It's called Mottainai. And I want to be upfront, there's a version of this idea that can go wrong, that turns into guilt and shame. And I'm going to show you exactly how to avoid that version, because it matters. Let's get into it. Mottainai roughly translates to "what a waste." But that flat translation loses almost everything interesting about it. The feeling underneath the phrase isn't really about wastefulness in a moral, finger-wagging sense. It's closer to a kind of tenderness toward things, an awareness that everything, a grain of rice, a carrot, a piece of fish, took real effort, real time, real life to arrive on a plate. Mottainai is the small pang you feel when something with that much behind it gets thrown away without a second thought. In Japan, this phrase gets used constantly, well beyond food. A broken umbrella still mostly working, a half-used candle, a toy outgrown too soon. It's less a rule and more a lens, a habit of noticing the value and effort already invested in the ordinary things around you. Now, here's the important detour. Because a lot of us actually grew up with a broken version of this idea, even if we never heard the word Mottainai. Finish your plate. There are children starving somewhere who would be grateful for that food. Maybe you heard that exact sentence as a kid. I did. Here's why that version doesn't work and actually causes harm. It takes a real tender idea, respect for effort and resources, and turns it into guilt, imposed from outside, attached to someone else's suffering that a small child has no actual power to affect. A toddler cannot process children elsewhere are hungry in any way that produces gratitude. What it usually produces instead is confusion, a vague low-grade shame about food, or simply anxiety at the dinner table that has nothing to do with actually valuing what's on the plate. So if Mottainai is going to be useful here, it has to be the tender version, appreciation and connection, not the guilt version, shame and comparison to someone else's suffering. Everything from here forward is built on that distinction, and I'd ask you to hold on to it because it's the difference between this actually working and this quietly making mealtimes worse. Here's the first practical layer, and it's simply this. Instead of a rule about waste, tell the story behind the food, often, casually, without any pressure attached to whether they eat it. This rice grew in a field, and someone spent months growing it before it ever got here. Grandma spent an hour making this soup this afternoon. These carrots came all the way from a farm, and someone pulled each one out of the ground by hand. Notice what this does and doesn't do. It doesn't demand anything. It doesn't say, and therefore you must finish it. It simply gives the food a story, a history, a chain of effort behind it. The same way a favorite toy feels different once you know your grandmother made it by hand. Children, it turns out, respond far more to story and connection than to instruction, and a plate with a story behind it gets treated a little differently than a plate that just appeared. Here's the second layer, and it's almost embarrassingly practical, but it matters enormously. A huge amount of toddler food waste isn't really about disrespect or pickiness at all. It's simply about portion size. A pile of food that's too big for a small stomach was structurally doomed to become waste, or a battle, or both, from the moment it hit the plate. So, serve smaller portions than feels intuitive, genuinely small, with seconds always freely available if they want more. This does two things at once. It dramatically reduces the raw amount of food that ends up wasted, because there was simply less excess to begin with. And it removes an enormous source of pressure because a small plate that gets finished feels like success to both of you, while a huge plate that gets abandoned halfway feels like failure, even though the child never asked for that much food in the first place. This single shift, smaller portions, seconds available, quietly resolves an enormous portion of both the waste and the tantrums, because so much of what looked like a food problem was actually a portion-size problem all along. Here's the third layer. Mottainai lands so much deeper when a child has had some small hand in the effort themselves, rather than only ever receiving a finished plate that appeared out of nowhere. This can be tiny, letting a toddler tear lettuce leaves, even messily. Stirring a pot, even briefly, with your hand steadying theirs. Carrying a napkin to the table. Watering a small herb pot on the windowsill that eventually gets snipped into dinner. The task matters less than the fact that some small piece of the meal passed through their own hands before it reached their plate. Here's why this works. Effort creates ownership, even in a very young child. Food you had a hand in making feels different from food that simply arrived. The same way a drawing you made feels different from one someone handed you already finished. A child who tore the lettuce is, in a small but real way, invested in that lettuce. And invested things get treated with a little more care, without a single word of instruction needed. And the fourth layer, and it's the quietest but maybe the most important one. Model Mottainai yourself, out loud, in small ordinary moments, the same way we've talked about modeling calm or modeling gammon in other videos. Use the whole vegetable and mention it. I'm using the broccoli stems too, not just the tops. Waste not. Finish your own plate with genuine, visible enjoyment, not performed, just real. Notice out loud when something almost got thrown away and didn't need to be. Oh, this is still good, Mottainai, to toss it. Children absorb far more from what they watch than from what they're told, and a household where the adults visibly, casually practice this themselves builds the value far more effectively than any lecture aimed at a 4-year-old ever could. Now, let's connect this back to the second half of the problem, the tantrums, because this is the part that ties everything together. A meal built around story, right-sized portions, small participation, and quiet modeling is no longer centered on the child's plate as a battlefield at all. There's no rule being enforced in the moment, no finish line being policed, nothing being taken away as a consequence. And when a meal stops being a battlefield, an enormous amount of the tantrum simply has nowhere to attach itself. The crying that used to erupt over "eat 3 more bites," or "you can't have more until you finish," that has much less fuel, because those specific triggers were never part of this approach to begin with. The waste goes down because portions fit and participation builds investment. The tantrums go down because the pressure that used to cause them was never applied in the first place. Same dinner table. 2 different problems, 1 underlying shift. Now, the honest note I promised at the start, and I want to say this plainly. This is not about creating a new kind of guilt, dressed up in a nicer word. If you ever hear yourself saying, "Think about the effort that went into this," in a tone that's really just a scolding in disguise, you slipped back into the broken version, and it's worth catching that and softening back into simple, casual storytelling instead. And one more honest thing, toddlers are messy, structurally, developmentally, unavoidably. Some flung rice, some half-eaten carrots, some genuinely wasted food, is a normal part of having a small child at the table. Not a sign that any of this is failing. The goal here isn't zero waste. It's a household where food is treated with a little more warmth and story over time, and where the dinner table stops being a place where battles reliably happen. Progress, not a perfect, spotless high chair tray every night. So, Mottainai, the tender version, appreciation and story, never guilt and comparison. Tell the story behind the food. Right-size the portion instead of the pressure. Let them participate in some small piece of getting it there. And model the whole thing yourself, out loud, in ordinary moments. None of these need to start all at once. Pick the one that feels easiest tonight, probably the smaller portion, and let the rest follow naturally, the same way most good habits in this house have, one quiet layer at a time. Tell me in the comments, which layer do you think would make the biggest difference at your table? The story, the portion size, the participation, or the modeling? I'd genuinely love to know which one lands for your family. This is the Quiet Garden. One gentle, honest idea every week for a calmer home. Take a breath. You're doing better than you think.